What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. We've had some great guests on over the last couple weeks, and I've still been getting a lot of great feedback, so I'm going to keep that going this week with another guest. This one's actually not from the Matterhorn weekend. I had the chance to sit down last week with Brian Gill, who's an NHLPA Certified Agent with Maloney and Thompson. I was at their development camp for the athletes that they represent, and Brian and I have been in touch quite a bit over the last few years, and he's been an awesome resource, especially when it comes to talking about things like player development, agents, and player representation. Obviously, the agent thing is always a hot topic, so it's great to have him as a guy that's boots on the ground doing it every day, that I had a chance to sit down and talk to at length. So before we get to that content, I just want to make one thing clear that Brian wanted to make sure I reiterate, is that this conversation is about players and player representation, things to do with agents and his thoughts and philosophies for players that are at the younger age group, not players that are at the NHL level or pro level. So that was one thing I want to make sure we make clear before we get into this. This context for this conversation was about that level of player, the kids that are junior age, major junior, and younger, not kids that are in that pro world, which is a whole different animal. Brian's role as an agent with that demographic is quite a bit different than what we talked about here. So we really localized the conversation to just this age group. So some of the things we did focus on with that in mind is how agency relationships work in the early stages, what players and families should understand before getting involved, and how someone like Brian approaches long-term development with athletes. So he kind of was a voice more generalizing across what agents do, what they can provide, how they can be valuable. It wasn't necessarily specific to their agency, but it was more trying to shed some light or provide clarity around what agents can do, what they can't do, and topics like that. And we covered a ton in this conversation that you're going to hear, what his day-to-day looks like, how they onboard families, all the way to what of some of the top performing future pros are doing behind the scenes, because he does get to have a very personal relationship with a lot of these players, where you should play, and of course the hot question of, do you need an agent, when you need an agent, and a lot of the details surrounding those kinds of conversations. I was really excited to have this conversation because it is a super hot topic. It's probably one of the most popular questions that you guys ask all the time. And it was a super valuable perspective to have somebody who's in it every day, executing at a high level, has a proven track record for many years. And so I really hope this provides you guys with a ton of value. I really enjoyed the conversation. Definitely going to have Brian on again at some point. So let's get into it. So Brian, this has been a long time coming, I feel.
Yeah.
I feel like I was trying to think back when I was driving up here today. When did we first connect? I don't remember if it was about the podcast or what, but I don't know if you remember. I don't know if it was I know it was email for some reason, but I don't remember what the reason was to start. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah. It was back, I want to say it was 2+ years ago. And I know, just following along your podcast and what you and Andy had going, there was what really resonated and hit home was just the fact that a lot of the topics and positions and the way you guys frame things is basically, what we're kind of preaching and how we, are talking to players, talking to families, and it was great. Like we loved that. This is out there for everyone to hear. And so I reached out. I think I pinged you a direct message on Instagram. And
LinkedIn.
Then, yeah.
It was a LinkedIn.
Oh, it was LinkedIn.
It was
yeah.
LinkedIn. That's right.
I knew it was LinkedIn or Instagram.
Yeah.
And then just, sharing, praise about what you guys have going on. And if there's any way of, helping each other out and connecting. Because I find that in this industry and in anything, it's like having that network that you can rely on, solid resources, and you guys, it really stood out.
Yeah, cool. So I want to talk about you to start, just so people that are listening get a little bit of sense of your background, what you guys do, and then I can get into some questions, because I'm actually excited to have this conversation, because this is probably, if not the most popular question, it's definitely one of the most popular questions or topics, is about agencies, agents, advisors. What do you need? What don't you need? And like these kids that are skating out here right now, that kind of age group, right? That age group of kids and their parents trying to figure it out, like what makes sense for them as a player, what you guys do, information around all of that stuff, what to look out for. So that's kind of what I want to get into, which is why I was excited to have the conversation, because hearing it from, me and Andy, we're not agents. So getting it from somebody that's actually in it doing it is a better, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past too, but start with like just a little bit about yourself, the background, what you guys do here, and then for you personally, like how you got into what you do now.
Yeah, sure. Where do you want me to start? Like, that was
So was
a couple different prongs there.
The background of getting into, how did you end up being an agent?
How to get into it, yeah.
And then what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So like we were just talking before we kicked up here, not a linear path really for this, for my role. When I went to university, this was in 2000, I went to Brock University's sport management program, and it had been rolling for a couple of years, and it was of course a highly reputable program, sought after, very competitive to get into. And in fact, like I didn't even get accepted to sport management. I had to accept into rec and leisure, and then carve my way from there and just mock what the first year program would look like. And then fortunately, I got in my second year. But yeah, concentrated group of aspiring sport management students, and of course, you get into the program and it's of course like the Jerry Maguire, which back in that era, I guess that was probably one of the more renowned sport agent movies that was popular, and that wasn't my motivation. So I grew up in a small town in Ontario, and my family, we had a sporting good retail shop, and we had that for 19 years, and it was something that I thought I would get into the hard goods, like the equipment side of things, and I was passionate about designing my idea of equipment and what the latest and greatest would look like, and that's where my focus was. But of course, many do get into the sport management program thinking like, all right, that's where I'm gonna hit a home run, and that's what I want to be. But so graduated 4 years there. Stayed involved from the academic standpoint. I was their course coordinator and was a teaching assistant, and fell into aviation. So I spent kind of I call it a mini career in aviation, went through a few airlines over by the course of 10 years in management. And then, I was teammates with one of the agency partners. So Dave Maloney and myself were teammates, and I kept, once him and his brother Andrew had invested in the agency, I was, of course, just leaning into what was happening, really interested in seeing how things were evolving. And then that's where things really kind of shifted back. And, I thought that there'd be a way that I can tap into my background in aviation management, and then apply that into, managing players. And so that's where the opportunity presented itself, and just started building out, a group of players that I was working with. And that's, now fast forward, 9, almost 10 years now with the agency.
Yeah, cool. So what does the actual day-to-day look like for you? Like, what is most of your time spent doing, or what kind of different tasks are you kind of in charge of within the agency, or even with respect to players?
Yeah, sure. So, throughout the season, there's ebbs and flows to it. I mean, right now, this is one of the marquee events for our agency, where we host our players here in Toronto that are here learning, developing, and these are guys who are going to be going on. Some of them are playing major junior hockey. They're playing overseas, and we're this is something that takes a lot of planning. And of course, we've got we've got our administration, we've got the agency partners, we have all of our key on ice resources, as well as off ice guidance as well, that really help shape these players that are going to be hopefully going on to do great things in carving out a career.
So when you're actually engaging with the families, and particularly players that are already under the umbrella of the agency, what does that kind of relationship look like from your perspective? What kind of role do you guys play in maybe shaping decisions, nudging them in certain directions, or just being someone that they can bounce ideas off of, or have conversations with? What exactly does that kind of relationship look like with the families?
It's a bit of everything. At many times you're helping them with strategic planning when it comes to next steps in hockey and kind of what's coming. And that's where, the players and the families receive a lot of value in the fact that, they may not know otherwise. And what I find as well, especially with families who, they've got, this is their first time through it, where you don't know what's coming ahead. And we can really, we take pride in knowing what's ahead and things that, are really going to be helpful as next steps. And things to maybe stay away with that you don't need to get involved with and spend, because you can easily get caught up in spending a lot of money and time in the wrong areas. And so, we provide a lot of guidance in that. And yeah, there's also times that, you're a sounding board, things, everyone's has unique nuances or unique things happening in their immediate vicinity, and it can create a lot of stress. And I know that parents really value their relationship, that they can come to you for advice, and it might not be hockey, but it could be something that is directly impacting their child, their child's ability to be able to focus on hockey. And it could be some barriers that, that's where, we're experienced and accustomed to helping in those scenarios. And so, yeah, that's where it's a long-term relationship that you're establishing. We start working with the players at a younger age, and, introducing things at the appropriate stages so that they can continue to evolve and hopefully gain that a competitive advantage as they go from, to major, junior, and then onwards at the next step. And it's, there's so many unique variables that can play a factor, and it's important for us as player representatives to understand the the unique inner workings of the player and the family, so that you can apply the appropriate guidance and support. It's not just a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah. So do you feel like when you're obviously that's a great point. Like, all families are different, all players are different, and they require different things. When you first have a player, maybe that you're onboarding, do you have like a kind of a standard set of things that you guys do with that family to begin, and then after that it's kind of like just gauging the relationship as you go for what they need? Or do you have a like a standard check-in procedure, or how involved are you guys actually in what's going on day to day? Because one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of players is specifically when they're talking about agents, something I get a lot is I was actually just having a conversation on my way up here with a family, and they were talking about their agent. Their terms were I feel like the agent, he's just too big for us. Like, he's got too many players, he's got too many things going on, and I don't feel like I get the attention. So we're maybe looking at changing agents. Like, this was something that they said. So what does it look like for you guys engaging like that level of communication, or how involved should you actually be, or how involved are you with these guys?
Yeah. So our approach, something that, we really highly adhere to, part of our mantra is that we have a healthy ratio of player representative to client. And we, our agency has been around for over 40 years. And this is not something that, we're figuring out on the fly. And there's nothing wrong with agencies being big or small. We handle a lot of, we handle a high volume of professional contracts. And, with that, when we're taking on new clients, it's all in perspective that we know what we can take on, and we're looking to over deliver when it comes to services and support, right? And I think it's important for the family and the player to feel that they matter, and it's not ever going to be a thing where they're trying to reach out, no one's picking up the phone. We believe that there's different times throughout the year where players are going to need more support, and then there's going to be times where it's you're just waiting for the next major event or something that's happening. But it's keeping a pulse on what the player is going through. And you talk about, so our cadence, like, yeah, we check in with them quite often, so that if there's something that they want to share with you, that they know that they can do that. And whether it's the player, again too, it's sometimes players are not as comfortable, and it's something that evolves, right? The trust, you're establishing trust, and then you get to know them. And then, for me, it's a lot of time I see them as an extension of my own family. Like I've got two, amazing daughters that are into sports, not hockey, except for the one's going to try it. But it's it's just something that I see them as family, and they hopefully they see that as well. So it's really pushing that fact that they can trust and you're available when needed.
Yeah, that's one thing I've actually really noticed about you. Like, kudos to you, because of everyone that's here, obviously I know you best and all that, but you do a great job of putting the time into the conversations with the parents, with the kids, and I know, like, the due diligence up front at the very least is, like, you really try to actually get to know the family and make sure they get to know you and all that stuff, which gives that level of comfortability, which I think is awesome. So on that, when you're kind of going into finding new players, let's say, or players you want to represent the next age group that's coming up or whatever it is, what are you guys kind of looking for? Like, what's the combination of whether it's skills on ice, off ice, or things that are important to you, or if you want to just make it more generic, that players should know that this is kind of what serious agencies that are actually representing serious players are actually kind of looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, we're lucky. We have an agency that is rich with resources that are honing in on what's happening at the age groups, so that when it is time to approach a family or reach out, make that introduction, and then feeling that comfort level of, okay, this is what you're getting, or at least you think that you're getting. And again, you're doing an assessment, right? And you're trying to vet, you're trying to you're going through due diligence, doing homework, and it's spending a lot of time in the rinks. And it's not just coming from one point. With our agency, there's a lot of layers to that assessing process that, what's great, we can argue, what one person sees might not be the same as the other, but you're trying to find, some common themes. And with elite players that, are going on to signing pro contracts, a lot of it you start to notice at a young age, and it's healthy habits. Not necessarily is the kid who leads the Alliance or GTHL or any of the leagues, for me anyway, in Ontario, that's going to guarantee this player is guaranteed to make it to the pros. But we have a very good eye, I think, at identifying talent, and as do many agencies. It's quite often no secret to which players have a greater chance to make it on. But yeah, you're looking and you're really trying to hone in on some of the intangible things. You're asking around your rinks, you're getting to know people and asking questions. You're asking about the family. You're asking what the work ethic is like, and generally you're hoping to be able to triangulate it. That, all right, this player, of course, he's productive. He sees the ice really well. He's got a great motor. I mean, all of these things are essential, and then you start to split hairs, and then you're hoping to find a player. But every player has something that they need to work on. Even though you could be all first round players drafted to the OHL, for instance. They might have little things incremental things that they've got to improve on. And, it's being able to identify those things. And that's where I feel like within as an agency, that's where we help address those things so that it sets them up for an opportunity at the next levels. And, what we're looking for, yeah, you're looking for character, you're looking for on ice abilities, and yeah, those are the players that you're looking to invest time in. Again, it's always up to the player to make it. An agency does not have this magical powers that will guarantee a player to sign a pro contract. We always were very transparent, and we let the families and players know that this is up to the player. We can provide all the resources and guidance and support, but it's going to be up to the player to want to engage in action those things.
Right. That's like the perfect message, because I get the sense a lot of times talking to families that there's an illusion that is the case with families that are coming up, is like the agent will make the difference. The agent will be the thing that gets my kid off to the next level and all those things. And as much as it can be helpful, it can be something that maybe gives you an extra percentage point here and there, like on the margins that push you on. Ultimately, the framing of the way, I feel like the way families think about it and the way players think about it, when they're comparing themselves to other players that have agents and all this stuff, they don't really understand that point. So I think that's great to hear. So from the family side of it, that kind of gets us into the next question, which is the most popular question of when is the right time to get an agent? Should I get an agent? Do I need an agent? Those kinds of questions is probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular question I get. So what would your advice or guidance be for answering that question if you're a player? And you can go by a particular player, if you're a high-end player, a average player, or a lower-end player. Like, what are your thoughts on that kind of question?
Yeah. And so, when it comes to the draft, so the OHL priority selection, right? This is a priority selection. It's what teams feel when it's their time to draft or select a player. It's what's going to be best fit for their organization. Players U16 players, they do not have to have representation. There are benefits to having someone who is communicating with the teams so that you can hear what the teams feel of the player, not what the public lists say, because there's so much out there that you can easily get caught up in the noise, and you can easily be mentally affected by it. Where as an agency, we help just paint the real picture for the family and for the player. And that's where, it's important to have these real relationships and talk to, those individuals at each of the teams that have, decision making power. And, when it comes time for the priority selection day, and we're not going to necessarily know exactly when a player is going to be chosen, but, generally honing in on an area. And, and this is where many of the lists that are out there, they're subscription based, and parents could, again, it's kind of like you take it with a grain of salt, but at the end of the day, it's important for what the teams are thinking of a particular player. And with that, there's value in having someone who is advocating for you or having those conversations with the teams, but the teams are going to pick who they want to pick, right? They're going to see the player in whatever light that they see, and they're having their own discussions, right? You've got the GM is ultimately the one, with the ability to make that selection, but you've got a lot of people influencing, and there's a lot of discussions that are happening, prior to that date. And of the draft, maybe half have representatives. If you're, again, it changes from year to year, but again, a player does not have to have a player representative in order to be drafted. And I think that there are certain stages that when you provide the resources and the player is mature enough to understand how to use those resources, that's where it makes the most sense. And, I think, because again, like you're negotiating contracts, and now with the new CHL agreements, there's there's certain things in place that it's a little bit more consistent and templated, that there's not hard negotiations happening, okay, for those at the CHL level. But of course, as you continue on in your career, looking at professional contracts, it's important to have that sound legal advice when it comes to negotiating those contracts.
Yeah. So, what are there any differences that you see between somebody who would be considered an agent versus somebody that would be considered an advisor? And this could be you personally, or like what your agency feels about it. What are some of those differences, and what are some things, positives and negatives, are to watch out for when you're going through the process, whether it's an agent or an advisor? So first, just what are the differences? How do you think about those differences, if there are any? And then what advice do you give to families that are trying to navigate going with somebody versus not?
Yeah, well, I mean, the difference really is you're looking at advisors helping that player, providing guidance on school options. So they're amateur status, right? And advisors are helping sift through what the program's about, the quality of coaching that would be there, helping really navigate that as an amateur athlete. And as an agent, you're representing a player and negotiate. You have the ability to negotiate contracts. And I think for a player, you want to be able to sort through and trust your gut in terms of who you feel comfortable with, who would have your best interest. If you're looking for an agent, and looking at a pro contract, then it's you want to have someone who has that standard, that high standard. So an NHLPA Certified Agent within the agency, and from there, I think it's like anything. You want to do your due diligence. You want to do a background check, talk to people, and at the end of the day, you're making a decision to establish a relationship, and working with someone who is hopefully going to have your best interest, throughout your career, and that's really what's most important. And there's like anything that. There's going to be difficult times, and things aren't always sunshine and roses. It's like you've got to you work through things, and it's something that for ourselves, like if there are challenges or things that come up, like we feel it's important to address them and constructively, have a plan and, work through it.
Yeah. So if you had a choice, let's say like these questions are always very easy if you're a very high end player, because normally decisions are a little easier if you're a very high end player. But if you're kind of like one of those middle borderline type players, this is where a lot of the difficulty comes in making decisions, because it's like, okay, if I go for a bigger agency that has, a little bit more clout, a little bit more clients, there's pluses to that for sure. But then there's also minuses. If I go with, a guy that maybe doesn't have a big footprint, there could be positives to that. Maybe they work a little harder for me possibly, or maybe they're shady, right? I don't know. So what advice do you give to kind of those families in that kind of scenario, if they're in that, that tricky kind of situation where they don't know exactly what makes the most sense?
Yeah. And I think this is where players, of course, who, stand out as star players, elite players, they're going to end up garnering that interest level. Like the families, the players, they're going to be inundated with agents reaching out to express their interest, and then they're gonna. It's maybe a good problem to have. I guess you've then got to sort through the pile. You've got to have a lot of conversations, and that can be really stressful. That it no doubt is stressful for families, and it's not as easy. And then for ones that are call it, I don't know, like the second tier, maybe they haven't just their game hasn't evolved. There's things that they're still working out with maturity in their game. And if if agents haven't reached out, that's okay. I mean, it's also what your expectation is as well. Like you may still have an opportunity to make it to next levels and carve out a pro career. And there's, it's out there that after the first couple rounds of the NHL draft, the largest percentage of players is undrafted players. So, it's going to show that, hey, if someone's willing to stick with it, even though that they weren't fortunate enough maybe to be drafted at the major junior level or even at the NHL level, like it's what you are want to continue to put into it, carving out a career. And if you are out there seeking an agency, what is it you're doing it for? Is it because you don't have access to resources and you want advice in that area? Is it you just don't know what you don't know? Or is it you just want to have the label? Where if it's the last, if you're just wanting the label, it's really the wrong thing. So those players in that time, leading into the OHL. Well, again, I'm giving the OHL example, but CHL draft, you don't have to have representation, and you can be signed, and no problem. You still got to figure things out at the next level. And then it's not really until you're looking to sign a professional contract that's where you want to have that sound legal advice.
Yeah. How do you feel about I guess in your experience with, because you guys obviously represent a ton of really, really high end players that are going to go on and play in the NHL and all that stuff. What does their kind of hockey life balance look like? Because for me, it seems like a mixed bag. Like all players are different. Like some guys are like the most dialed in ever, and like that's what gets them there. Other guys maybe seem like they're a little bit more casual about how they're approaching things. But what have you seen? Or have you noticed any consistent patterns on what some of these players that you represent have that makes them successful, or on the right track to get that ultimate goal of being a professional hockey player?
Yeah, I find the ones who are they're intrinsically motivated. They're ones who they understand that they have to make these sacrifices, but not only make sacrifices, but enjoy it. Like you have to enjoy, getting up early, committing to, having a proper meal, doing your workout, going about your day. And there's, again, like your day only has so much time. And if you are set on making it to next levels, it is kind of like, do you choose to go hang out with your friends at the beach, or take off and go on a roadie somewhere, or are you going to go grind it out in the gym and you're going to go get your proper rest, and you're telling a lot of your friends like you can't do things. And so you look at our clients or any player really that's in that zone of major, junior, NCAA pros, like the commonality is like they are so focused and devoted because they can see, they can visualize what it's going to be like and what it takes to be a pro.
Sorry to cut you off. Do you have anyone that like any specific examples of guys that kind of stand out in your mind of like anything like unique or something that just stands out to you, I guess?
In just their habits, like their everyday.
Yeah, is there like any particular player that you've worked with or anything like that where it like maybe even for you, like early on as an agent, where it just like maybe it was even eye-opening or interesting to see a young person and some of the habits that they have or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you Easton Cowan's a great example of just someone who he grew up in a small town and he just was dedicated to his craft. Just everything was his hockey. And I find that everything revolves around that. And it's like, you know, there's a lot of options, as you know, from like an early teen, but it's, you choose to engage with things that are hockey themed. And it's, Easton's got this funny video of him doing like these tricks with a buddy, and this is, I don't know, he was about 7 or 8 years old, I think, and it's just
you showed me that. That's so funny.
You're just, I find that there's just something unique about these players that that is, I don't know, helping them get a competitive advantage and work, like, build out their craft. There's guys who, like, you look at social media now too, and I'll never forget, like, so Ty Nelson was from the Toronto area, and a defenseman who really strong, had a great OHL career, and now he's going on through the pro ranks. And I remember seeing a social media clip of just him, his stick handling, his movement. He's doing this on like the fitter ball, and I'm like, it's that's crazy, but this is just what he does for fun. So you asked me about just what's different. I find that players they have these unique interests that they go about the game.
Yeah,
they're preparing for it.
Yeah, that's cool. I remember you shared that video with me of Easton. It's hilarious, man. He's just a little guy. He's got the same face as he does now, but just a little guy messing around. It shows the personality and all that stuff, which is awesome.
For sure.
So one of the other things that, especially for the young guys, because you have even here you got some guys that are maybe 2011s that are coming up towards their draft. One of the big questions that we get quite a bit, and it'd be good to get your perspective on, is where guys should be, where they should play, what team they should play on, and all that stuff. How do you think about that from, like, dealing with that individual? You're talking about treating them like they're your own family, almost like a parental kind of role or mentorship kind of role with them. So what are your thoughts about where players should be playing, and what they should be trying to, where they should be trying to position themselves to get noticed or get drafted or move on to a higher level?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that's such a hot topic now with open borders, and
seriously,
now it's all right.
I wasn't even thinking of that either.
Where are we packing up to, to send our kid to play? But I don't know. I think really when that happened, of course there's so much chatter about it, but again, like, there's a lot of other limiting factors to that. Not every family just has the means or ability to just pick up and move centers because their kid wants to play for, whatever team. But then going back to, how do you determine, like, what's a good fit, or where should you play? And that's something that, yes, of course, we do play a part in that. We help evaluate, what are the options and what are you looking at? And then you put everything on the table, and then you start to say, okay, well, maybe this might not work because it's, how are we going to get you there to practices or games or whatever it might be? And at the end of the day, you really want to just understand whatever team or program you're looking to go to, like, where do you fit? And I think it's important to have a realistic understanding of what player, like, where do you fit and what do you have to offer? And because the grass isn't always greener, and it might be marketed as this is a great opportunity, but what you may not know is who else is coming into play, right? It's not necessarily going to be the same roster. It may not be the same coach. Things can change pretty quickly, and so it's not rocket science, but, like, you evaluate the pros and cons, and then at the end of the day, we're not vetoing what the parents want to do. We try to give sound quality advice, and at the end of the day, it's what they feel most comfortable with.
So maybe a little more, like, specific. How do you value, or what are your thoughts on obviously, because there's a balance and you have to judge every situation where you have an opportunity, but playing for a really good team versus playing where maybe it's not as good of a team, but you are going to play a little bit more? Like, how do you think about juggling those kinds of variables when a family's kind of making a decision? Do you put more value on one versus the other, or like for you personally, when you're having the conversation with the family, like, where do you lean a particular way, or like, what's kind of your advice around that kind of question?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. I always see it like buckets, and it's like you're trying to get all the buckets as full as you can, but you don't want it to be at the expense of losing, a lot out of one. And so where a player is going to have opportunity to play, like that's how that's where you're going to learn. But not everyone's fortunate enough to necessarily be playing in a top six forward role or a top 4D, or the starting goalie, right? So you have the conversations with the GMs, the coaches, those who are involved with the program, and you try to ascertain like what's it gonna look like, what's it gonna be, and you try to project, you try to understand like what the landscape's gonna be like. But yeah, an opportunity to play. But there's we go through this with guys entering where they're a major junior, and it's like, okay, well, here are my options. Should I go play junior B for a year as my first year junior, or am I going to sign? Do I want to sign and play, have a roster spot with an OHL team, but maybe be very limited with minutes and opportunity, where it's such a crucial development stage for players where, if you extend over the course of the year, if someone is maybe a fourth line player and maybe in and out of the lineup in their OHL with their OHL organization, for example, versus going to play maybe on a junior A or junior B card somewhere and then being seen as, a player that plays a lot of minutes, is an every night contributor, maybe they're playing specialty teams as well, that has a lot of value, and especially in terms of their development. And it's going to, then you sometimes see players leapfrog others who maybe plug themselves into a CHL roster spot. And then, where if you've had, sometimes it's like 3 times the amount of ice and opportunity compared to someone, maybe their peers who, they signed a card and they didn't really see the ice. It was practice only.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one of the most interesting ones to juggle when we're having conversation with the families. But
yeah, and on that note though too, Eric, where let's say, because we've had this as well, where players are maybe not on the strongest team, and let's say this player has been known to be the best player, like they've got everything, okay, but then there's a drop off to the next best player. And then sometimes that player is limited because it's not being reciprocated with their teammates, right? So that plays are happening, they're seeing it as something, but their teammates just don't process it at the same time. So, you can be really dragging the ship along, and it's, so in those cases, yeah, you sort of lean on what might be a better center or program to play for.
Yeah, it's so interesting, man, because it's such a complex decision-making process for kids that are so young and families that don't really, they might not even understand what they're making a decision on, right? Like they might not really grasp like what are the differences between this team and that team and what might it look like, and they maybe don't know what the questions are to ask and all that stuff, right? Which is kind of interesting.
Go ahead. With that as well, like if you're for a player who is looking at, continuing on, and you're looking at what coaching is available there as well, where if you do your background research, and there's a lot of coaches who are very instrumental in elevating players and getting the most out of the group. And so, that's coaching at the right, at the right ages, the right time can be, can really make or break it for some players.
Sure. I know you got to go, because I want to respect your time here. So just last question, kind of putting it back on the players. Is there anything that stands out to you, because you spend so much time in the ranks, that younger players are kind of missing, or is there a pattern of qualities that you don't see as developed that players could pay attention to? That could be a skill, it could be a character trait, it could be whatever things that you see when you're either talking to the players, watching them play, whatever it is. Is there anything to you that stands out as something that is, I don't want to use the word concerning, maybe not concerning, but just kind of missing, that as a whole maybe the younger ages coming up could pay more attention to, and something that they should think about developing?
Yeah, actually, just before we came up here, I was speaking with one of our on ice coaches, and he was just saying how his, he's seeing it that for players, when you start out with pucks and it's like, you're doing a shooting drill or something like that, your focus is like ripping pucks, scoring goals, doing things with the puck, but you forget about what your feet are doing or what you're supposed to be doing. And now, as you know, Eric, like, skating such an absolute important necessity to have at like next level hockey. And I think for players, when you're working with coaches, it's important to know and be open to that feedback, that direction, that, hey, like, forget the pucks. And he was saying this. He goes, I'm taking the progressive approach where this is how, like, your body should be angled when you're picking the puck off a rim or something like that, and then grabbing the puck and then knowing what you're doing with it. But think first about what your lower half is doing, so that you can maximize. Because a lot of your shooting comes from how you're skating is, right? And I mean, I'm not an expert in no way, shape, or form when it comes to that.
Yeah, all the time.
But if you give them the puck, right away, that immediately, like, that's where your attention goes to, like, what you're going to do with the puck versus like skating. And of course, like, there's so much, I find too, where the play away from the puck is so important. And when kids can kind of grasp onto that earlier, the better.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually that's a big thing that there's been a long stretch over the last several years of like the skill development stuff. And I've actually never heard it really articulated the way you just said it, which is a great way of thinking about it. It's like when you have the puck, your attention goes to having the puck and you don't really think about what the rest of your self is doing. So spending some time without it to actually get to know what your body is doing and where you are in space, what your feet need to be doing. That's a really good way of putting it. That's awesome.
Especially if you've naturally been a speedy player, like sometimes, there's kids out there that their feet are always moving. But what if you could make that 10% better by focusing on what your legs are supposed to be doing, before you get the puck, and then also with the puck, keeping your focus, with that. So yeah, it's just interesting that, how, I guess where kids focus and attention goes to.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Well, listen, I could keep talking to you probably for another 3 hours, but I know you got to get going. So thanks for taking some time today, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Hopefully we can do it again soon.
Totally appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Eric.
So that's a bit of insight from Brian Gill. Like I said, he's been a resource for me for the last couple of years. I've been working with them quite a bit at Maloney and Thompson, and Brian's kind of my main guy that I chat with there. And just to reiterate what I said before the episode started, this episode is really geared towards junior level players and families and younger. It wasn't for, speaking on what they do at the pro level or with NHL players. That's a little bit of a different game in what the agents play in that role. So we didn't really get into that too much. So just keep that in mind when you guys are reflecting on some of this stuff. This is kind of the appropriate demographic is just that, the junior age and a little bit younger. So with that said, there was a couple key things that I really liked about what Brian said. Obviously, he echoes a lot of things we talk about on the podcast quite a bit, but the way he phrased a few things I thought was super valuable. First was the point Brian mentioned about agents don't have magic powers. At the end of the day, the player is the one that decides what level they get to. The agent can be a very, very helpful resource. It can be very effective and useful to have somebody advocating for you, someone to bounce ideas off of and guide you. But at the end of the day, the agent doesn't make or break what happens to any given player. The vast majority comes from the player themselves, and maybe you get some marginal gains from different resources you have, not just agents, but anything. But it always comes back to that mindset of ownership. That's something that the player needs to take ownership of their own development journey, and that's a key that Brian touched on. A second point that I really liked was when we talked about the OHL draft specifically, Brian brought up a great perspective that needs to be echoed, because so many people get caught up in the noise heading into the OHL draft. And this is something that I'm experiencing right now, talking with a lot of families going into that U18 level that just went through their draft year as 2009 age group. So many of them were either blindsided or didn't understand what was happening in the draft and who was doing what. Brian's key insight there that I really liked was the teams are going to pick the players that they want and what they feel at that time. It's not what the agents say. It's not what the lists say. It's not what other parents say. It's what those teams feel is best for them at the time of that draft. And that's something that can really get lost in all the noise when people are going through it themselves. It's about what the teams are actually looking for at that time. And most of the time at that level, there's no need for real heavy negotiations from the agency standpoint. Bringing on an agent just for that might be unnecessary, but the key there is, again, it's about what the teams want. It's not about what the agent can do, what the agent can negotiate or anything like that. We touched agents and advisors a little bit. I appreciated Brian's honesty on that. Whether you get an agent or advisor, or you want an agent or advisor, the key thing there is, why do you want one and what's it for? And that's something that I want people to think about, because a lot of kids, maybe a lot of parents too, try to have an agent or advisor for the label of it, not necessarily for how useful or valuable it will be to that player and to that family. So that's a key thing to keep in mind on that as well. And then the last one that really stood out to me, there was a bunch more, but one of the keys for me was talking about some of the habits of some of the high-end players that they deal with, especially how they manage their time and what their mindset is like. So the best guys that Brian has seen or worked with, and what he said was, they really enjoy what we would call the sacrifices. And the way that I frame it a lot is, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice if, hockey or whatever the thing is, but for our example, it's hockey. If hockey is what you really care about, not doing other things doesn't necessarily feel like a sacrifice, though we can categorize it that way. And I really liked how Brian put it. They enjoy the sacrifice. They enjoy putting all of their time and effort and energy into hockey and hockey related things. And that doesn't mean they never either, get off track or, spend time doing other things, but the vast majority of their mindset, their focus is on things surrounding the game of hockey in some capacity. So a couple key takeaways there from my end, but obviously there's a whole bunch more. If you think this was valuable, I know this is a hot topic that a lot of people talk about. Feel free to share the episode with anyone that you feel could use it, because it is something that needs clarity. And it's great to have someone who is an agent, again, on the ground doing this every day to speak to it. So huge thanks again to Brian for jumping on, and to Maloney and Thompson for having me out at their development camp. It was phenomenal to take part in. I've done it the last couple years now, and it's such a great event. So it's great to connect with those guys. So let me know what you guys thought about this one. It was a really fun conversation for me. Again, a key topic that a lot of people have questions on. I think it provided a lot of value. I hope a lot of you guys take something valuable from it, because I know that I did. So we'll see you in the next episode.